Hello and welcome to this week's edition of the People Progressing podcast. And on this week's show, we got Anthony Carter, who's joining the People Progressing family, and I'm really excited. Great leadership background. Was a lieutenant colonel, DEA agent. He's a plethora of experiences that we can all grow from today. So, Anthony, I want to thank you for coming on. And first thing I want you to do is just kind of tell the listeners where you grew up, how you grew up, what kind of things you like to do as a kid, and so forth, to give us a little background of where you're coming from.
Will do, Joe. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it. Like you said, my name is Anthony Carter. I'm a military brat. My dad was Air Force for 26 years, and so we pretty much grew up all over, mainly in Europe. My mother's Greek, born and raised in Greece, and so we moved 7 times as a kid. So we got to really understand diversity, flexibility, adaptability, just key things like that. And growing up with a military father, naturally comes the discipline.
Yeah.
So that was exciting. Except having to do all of our chores before we could eat breakfast was kind of rough at times, but it was good. So after I graduated high school in '86 in England, and my dad was stationed there, and I knew I didn't have the mental acuity to go to college right away. And so I joined the service to get some experience. So my first assignment was in Germany in '87, and then in Greece in '89, which I was very fortunate because I got to go and live with my Greek grandmother, my yaya. So that was awesome to live there for 2 years. And then my last year in the service was on active duty was in at Carswell Air Force Base in Fort Worth. Was there for a year and then separated, went into the reserves while I was going to doing my undergrad at the University of North Texas. So that was using my military experience, and I liked law enforcement. My dad was in law enforcement in the Air Force. I just liked the idea of serving and helping others. So right after graduating from college, I became a Dallas police officer. Probably one of the best jobs I ever had. It was a lot of fun, just going out, working and serving. And every call you go on is like jumping into a frying pan because you don't know what you're getting into until you get there. So you learn a lot. You learn how to talk to people, all kind of people, regardless of race, sex, gender preference, any of that stuff. You learn to talk to people. And so that was really fun. Unfortunately, though, like most of us with Dallas PD, we leave because the pay it wasn't very good. And not that you're trying to become rich, but you still want to have enough to care for your family. So I then joined DEA and became a federal agent and did that for 20 years. And that was a lot of fun. We moved 6 times with DEA, various places, including overseas. And
So when you were growing up, you were growing up in England most of the time, or in Europe most of the time. Did you play any sports or anything over there, or?
Yeah, so I was born in New Mexico. Then we went to Alaska, to North Dakota, to Greece, to Spain, back to Greece, to Oklahoma, to England.
Wow.
So I played sports in Greece. I played sports in Oklahoma and in England. So the one thing I really truly value is when you play sports. Sports it's like the best experience you're going to have in life because like our dad used to teach us is you learn to win with pride and lose with dignity, and you get to apply that to everything you do. Not every situation you get into is going to come out in your favor, and it's really how you respond to that, and really helps define your character. And so that was one thing that our parents really instilled in us. And so I played football, basketball, baseball, track and field. My brothers and I all played sports. In fact, our dad, who was from Waco, Texas, was his senior year was the male athlete of the year for his school. And then while we were in England, my brothers and I were fortunate for all of us in our senior years, we all made male athletes of the year. And so sports is very big in our lives. Now at my age, I don't really play a lot of sports except for golf. And that's probably, I love golf, and it's probably one of the hardest sports I've ever played
Yeah.
because it's not as physically challenging, but mentally and trying to learn, everything about the game.
Okay. Now let's dive into this military background. Did you go into the Air Force right out of high school? Is that the branch you went to?
I did. I went in the Air Force at 17, turned 18 in basic training. We had what was called a GI party. So the training instructors, the TIs, asked, how many people have a birthday in September? About 5 or 6 of us raised our hands, and they said, "Good, we're going to have a GI party in your honor." So we were all excited, not really understanding what a GI party was. For those that don't understand, those that do understand what a GI party, they're probably already laughing. For those that don't, it means you're going to clean everything. It's like the biggest cleaning party in the world. You clean everything from the ceiling down to the floor, and everything has to be spotless. And so when we had that party, it really wasn't so much of a party.
So what?
Yeah,
go ahead.
So I was in the Air Force for 5.5 years on active duty, 2 years in the reserves. The reason why I got out of the reserves is I had a commander at the time that I wasn't very fond of, and I wasn't fond of him because his thing was really about himself. And we had a base level exercise, and I had finals coming up, and I didn't want to miss my finals because I was paying for college out of my own pocket, along with that $400 a month GI Bill stipend, which wasn't a lot, didn't go very far. But I couldn't afford to miss finals for a base level exercise. And I kept trying to get my commander to authorize me to either come in the week before and set up or come in the week after and clean up. But during that specific week, we had finals, and there was no way I was going to miss finals. And he basically said, I really don't care what you're going to do, but you're going to be here for this exercise. I need you here. I was just one of few people that was qualified to run a certain position, but that wasn't my priority. Finishing college was my priority. And so I told him, thank you very much for the 7.5 years I gave the military. And I put my stuff essentially on the desk and walked out. So then in 2003, actually in 2001, when I was stationed with DEA in Detroit, I kept thinking about, rejoining the military. And then I got reassigned down to the McAllen, Texas border with DEA. And then that's when I really started looking back, getting into the military. So in 2003, I obtained a commission through the Army. And and then after 14 months, I transferred back to the Air Force into Criminal Investigations Office of Special Investigations. And I did that for 14 years before taking command of my current squadron. But I do have to sit there and say, even though I'm a reservist and I'm military, this podcast and everything I'm going to say is my personal opinion as a civilian, and it doesn't reflect the military or DEA when we get into those parts.
Okay. Yeah, that's awesome. So let's dive into this. You're still in the military. So how many years have you basically served our country being in the military?
26.
26 years. That's amazing. And how many years in the DEA? You said 20, right?
I did 20.
What is in your heart? What makes you want to serve others so much? What makes that tick? What makes you do that?
It's really the gratification of seeing people being happy. When you're in law enforcement, in particular, we go after the people that people watch on the news all the time, and yet everyone's so easily ready to critique everything that we do, and it's frustrating because we really have a split second to decide if this person is good or bad, and that split second, it often can cause harm either way, either towards them or towards us. And it's the same stuff that people have months and weeks and years and decades to decide if we did the right thing or not. But having said that, I just like helping people. When you go into the military or into law enforcement, the vast majority of times it's a calling. You're thinking of something that's greater than yourself. I've often heard people say, you know, I'll die. I'll give up my life to do this and do that. And my theory is I'm not going to give up my life to go do this and this. If I die in the process of doing it, then so be it. But I'm not just going to go lay down my life to go fight for the country, do this and that. I will go fight for the country. And if I get killed, then so be it. Otherwise, I'm going to keep fighting for the country and serving others.
That's amazing. What are some of the key leadership principles that you have developed from being in the military? And you mentioned one, I'm sorry to cut you off. You mentioned a guy that basically drove you out of the military. And what I want people to understand is you can learn a lot from that as well. You can learn a lot from bad leaders as well as good leaders. So what were some of the things you learned from the good leaders? And what were some of the things that you learned from maybe not so good leaders?
You know, I'm going to say this. You probably learn more from bad leaders
Yeah.
than you will a good leader. And because I've dealt with some bad leaders. I've dealt with leaders that have moved up the ranks. And once they got to a high position, it's about them. It's about themselves. And that's not the example that you want. Everyone says you want to, you know, I'm a firm believer, again, my dad taught us this too, that you leave a position in better shape than it was when you got it. And so I've always tried to, you know, I've had some really good supervisors, you know, in the military and with DEA. And the biggest form of flattery I can tell you is I try to emulate them. And so I took their examples, and especially when I became a first line supervisor, and I started applying the same theories and principles and teachings that they taught me. And it was rough at first because sometimes people don't like change. I had some guys in my group that were, I had some awesome people, I'm not going to lie, but some were resistant, and we talked about the things that the changes that we had to make and the reason why. I always try to explain it, why. And it's funny because even after I retired, I still get phone calls from them, and they're sitting there and they're like, yeah, I just moved to a new office. And, you know, after a few weeks here, the supervisor came up to me and said now that he has to teach everybody how to do something because he was doing it the right way and, or a better way. And so, and he's like, as much as I didn't like what you were teaching us, I realized you were right. And it's not that I hate to say that I'm right. It's just that I try to apply common sense, but which common sense isn't so common. But I try to apply that along with logic. I'm really big on working smarter, not harder. I tell people I'm lazy by nature. That's why I worked 2 jobs simultaneous so that when I can retire from both, I can have 2 pensions and I can just golf every day.
You deserve it.
But I learned a lot from, like I said, both good and bad leaders. The taking care of your people is the one thing I learned from the really good supervisors. They may not understand what you're trying to do at the time, but you know, just stick with it, stay true to yourself, stay true to them, and eventually they're going to see what you're trying to do. They may not see it right then and there. They may not even see it in your presence. But you know, just stick with your principles.
Yeah. And I think it's so interesting because I can tell that you're a people first leader. And you just said it, take care of your people first. And when you rose to the rank of lieutenant colonel, how long did that take? And what is the actual rank of lieutenant colonel? Can you explain a little bit about that?
So you just go through the natural progression of, you know, from second lieutenant to first lieutenant to captain. And then, so you're a captain for 7 years. And so you're a lieutenant for 2 years in each level, at each rank. So 4 years. And then you go to captain for 7 years. And then you're a major for 7 years. I was fortunate in that I got a position vacancy promotion. So I promoted in 5 years to lieutenant colonel. And so I'm just going into my 3rd year now. But as a lieutenant colonel, I'm a squadron commander. So I have approximately 142 defenders that are in my squadron. And, you know, when we talk about, you know, leadership stuff. So I do have to tell you, as a leader, if you're not self-reflecting all the time,
Yeah.
you're doing something completely wrong. And, when people meet me and they realize I'm not the smartest guy, and I never purport myself to be. I don't like people when they come to a room and they act like they're the smartest person, because they're the ones that aren't willing to listen. So I do like to talk about one particular story where, I'm a people solver. I'm a problem solver. It's just how I am. So many years in law enforcement, and maybe just, I don't know. I'm a problem solver. So my wife will come up and say something to me, and she'll have to literally tell me, stop thinking, don't, just listen. Don't do anything.
Yeah.
Listen. Because as she's talking, I'm already coming up with a solution. And and so in the squadron, I keep an open door. And so people come in and they want to talk to me. But the problem is when they come up and start talking problems, I'm solving problems. And so what I was doing was I was solving a lot of problems, or at least coming up with ideas and telling people what to do and how they can do it. But I wasn't including my subordinate supervisors. So my other officers, my chief master sergeant, my senior master sergeants, my master sergeants. And one day, I'd said something, and then I just had this epiphany, and it hit me like a brick wall. And I was like, oh man. And just coincidentally, right when I thought about it, my chief comes up to me and he's like, hey, sir, we'd like to talk with you. We'd like to get our senior staff and talk with you. I said, I'm glad you said that, because I want to talk with you guys too. So please go get everybody and bring them in the office. Let's talk. And so they came in the office, and usually I will sit back and let them talk first about something. But this was weighing so heavily on my heart and on my mind about what I had been doing, that I went on and trumped everybody and said, I'm going to talk first. And I told them what I realized I was doing. And what I was doing was I was inadvertently undermining everybody. I was making decisions. I was taking the authority from them and passing information directly to their subordinates, telling them what to do. And I wasn't even keeping my guys in the loop about what was going on. And I said, guys, I apologize. I'm completely wrong with what I've been doing. And we're gonna stop. We're gonna change the way we operate, and this is how we're gonna do it. But I want to get your input. If you agree on the way forward. And it was just funny, because as I'm talking to everybody, I'm reading their body language, and they're all kind of smiling. And then my chief steps up and he's like, sir, that's exactly what we wanted to talk to you about. You basically stole our thunder, but we were coming up to you to tell you that we've got to make some changes. So I was just very fortunate in recognizing it myself before they said something to me. But I also want to sit there and say, my staff got huge kudos and props for me for even having the guts to come up and talk to me about this, because that's the relationship that I want to have with all my people. Is if you don't agree with what I say, that's fine. Push back. Just be respectful, because I'm always going to be respectful. So they felt empowered, which is exactly where they're supposed to be. So they came up and they talked, and we all talked, and I'm ecstatic the way things worked out.
What a great story, and what an example of a couple of things there that I took from that story. One is great leaders are vulnerable. They're okay. They're accountable, and they're vulnerable. It was okay for you to go in there and say, hey, I've kind of screwed this up. Let's figure this out. It's my fault, and we're going to change it. And a lot of leaders aren't vulnerable like that. They don't take accountability for that and don't own things. And the second thing I want to point out in that story was the empathy that you developed for your people. In other words, you put yourself in their shoes and basically said, how would I feel if my superior officer was doing that to me? And when you said the epiphany, that was what that was, is you kind of put yourself in their shoes. And that's also, I think, a huge sign of a great leader, is having great empathy for your people. And then the third one was listening. I have a saying that says you need to learn to listen so you can listen to learn. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of the third thing. You said when you you're a problem solver. So when someone talks to you, and your story with your wife, when she said, just listen to me, don't solve it, right? She's telling you, just listen right now, because it's hard to solve problems when you don't listen to the whole problem. Right. So those are three great things that I took from those two stories, and should help leaders in a great way. You also served, Anthony, you served over in Afghanistan. How many times were you over there?
Once.
Once. Okay. And what was your job over there?
So I was the counterintelligence officer for the ISAF theater, so International Security Assistance Forces. Real quick though, Joe, just go back. One of the things that I've seen leaders who they understand, they recognize
Yes.
what their faults are.
Yes.
But are unwilling to make the changes. And
right.
That's frustrating, because they know, but they're still unwilling to make the change. And when they do make the change, it's always a short-term change. And it almost reminds me of, and it's a horrible analogy, and I apologize for your listeners, but when you have someone that's in a battered relationship, and the other significant other says, I'm not going to do that again. And then 2 weeks later, 3 weeks later, they're right back to doing it again.
Yeah.
And I've had managers and supervisors like that. And that's where it gets frustrating, is they understand, they say they're going to make the change and then they don't.
Right.
We don't practice that. I don't practice that. So I just felt that's important to say.
No, it's a great point, because I say this all the time too. The best leaders can lead through the noise. They can lead through the hard times, the adversity times. They don't get emotional during those times. They stay to their purpose of why they're leading. Well, what you're talking about, and this is a great example of leadership failure, in my opinion, and what you're talking about, and you can add on to this, is when the noise hits or when the problem hits, those type of leaders that can't handle it, they turn into emotional leadership. And when they turn into emotional leadership, they lose their purpose of why they're leading. And a lot of people can sit there and tell you, I have a purpose. My purpose in leading is to serve others, to help others, to guide others, to support others. And they're really good at telling you that. And they're really good at doing that when things are good. Okay. The problem is when things aren't good, when the hits the fan, they can't handle that, and they turn into the emotional leader, and their emotional state takes over their leadership. And that's when they get into doing what you just described, of going back and stomping on their people and making sure that they're surviving. They don't care if their people survive, it's them surviving. And they get into that emotional state leadership instead of that purpose-filled people first type leadership. Would you agree with something like that?
Oh, I do. And I do have to, I'm going to read it. I was just pulling up a text real quick. So this is without going into detail but I recently resigned from a job that I was doing that I really enjoyed. I was an assistant chief with a particular sheriff's office, and I was doing it for a couple of years. And then I just decided I had enough of law enforcement after 35 years. But just the other day, I got a text from one of my friends, and he says, one of my former colleagues, by the way, I hear nothing but praise from your troops, past and present, not BSing either. You're doing good things. If enlisted folks go out of their way to say how they love their commander, good stuff. And it was unsolicited.
Beautiful.
Completely different. And it caught me off guard when he said that. This guy also happens to be military, and so in a different squadron. And so anyway, it's about treating your people the right way.
Right. And that's why we do it, right? Because, I've said this on my podcast before, and I don't want to be redundant, but I coached and I led young people, not just for that day, but for 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30 years from when I coached them.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted them to be leaders themselves. I wanted them to be servant leaders themselves. I wanted them to be great husbands, great fathers, great workers, great community members, all those different things that helped serve the whole. And when you read a text like what you just read, that's exactly what you were doing to the people you were leading. Those people are now better off and better in our communities, better in being husbands and fathers and all of the above because of your leadership to them. And I think that's what all leaders should aspire to, is to lead people into being leaders, in lead their what they value and what people's values are, and let those values grow and let their strengths grow to help others as well. Beautiful story right there. This is really getting great. I'm getting more excited as we talk here. This is that text just kind of got me even more fired up. Let's go a little bit into the DEA. What made you go into that realm of service? Because I think people really overlook what the DEA gives our country in terms of trying to protect us from basically almost our own selves, if that makes sense.
Well, the DEA, Drug Enforcement Administration, a lot of people say agency, so we always try to correct them.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. It's Drug Enforcement Administration. What the DEA's purpose is to stop the illegal flow of narcotics into the United States, and that's essentially it. We don't manufacture drugs here in the U.S. For the most part. It's all coming from abroad somewhere. That's why DEA. I'm trying to remember. It was in the high 70s. How many offices we have in different countries, and the thing about the narcotics is 90. I would sit there at one point. I would say 95% of all crimes committed were one way or another drug related. I don't know if that's an accurate number. I would say probably between 85 to 90%, because why people go after drugs, because it's the most profitable. You take a kilo of coke from down on the Mexican border down in Texas or Arizona, and you're spending anywhere from 5 to 10 grand for that key, and then you take it up to another state, further away from the border, and it'll sell for anywhere from 25 to 35 a key. So you just made a huge profit. But then you take that one key and then you cut it up with adulterants, you step on it, and you can make one key, you can easily make 5 keys, and depending on how much purity you want with it. And so it's very profitable. And it's just unfortunate because when people start using the illegal narcotics, it has such a dramatic effect on everything. Not just your body, your mind, but then the activities you start to do, and the crime starts increasing. The robberies, the burglaries, the homicides. It's just people are constantly trying to do whatever they can to get their fix, and it's unfortunate. Several years ago, when President Calderon of Mexico came to the U.S. and he got to address Congress, and it was probably in my opinion, one of the most disturbing speeches that he gave, was that he talked about it was our thirst for illegal drugs that's causing his country to keep supplying us. And so it's your basic supply and demand. And he just kept talking about if we didn't have the thirst for it, they wouldn't provide it, and it's our fault. And then that same speech, he talked about it's our weapons that are being sent into Mexico that's causing his people to be killed. And so now it's our supply for their demand. And so on one side, he's saying it's our fault because we want his drugs, their drugs. And then it's our fault again because we're giving them weapons. And it's like, and why he was allowed to give that speech, so I'm sure his speech was vetted before he said it. It should have been stopped. It should have been stopped because, we were screwed either way. We came out as the bad guys, and you can't have it both ways. You can't sit there and say it is our thirst, our demand. But on the weapon side, it's their thirst and demand. And instead of trying to roll it to where we both have faults, it was solely the United States fault. That was frustrating.
So in your time with the DEA, is there some really, I don't even know how to form this question. Was there some very sad times that you could see where the drugs have just taken people down the wrong path that they can't get out of? Give people an idea of what these drugs are actually, what you've seen these drugs actually do to people and communities.
Well, it's I mean, you see it everywhere you go. A lot of the homeless people you see, and so the problem is though, is that everyone thinks it's just the poor, and we focus on the poor, which is not even true. There's businesses, I mean, major top level businesses, multi-million-dollar businesses that are in the business of drugs as well. And I'm not going to name any in particular, but I can tell you now, when you've got some of these CEOs and some of these upper echelons, they're just as bad, with the illegal drugs as your average, citizen on the street that is into narcotics. You just watch everything just, it literally circles the drain. You'll watch somebody who's profitable, has a nice business, but then they start commingling their illegal drugs money proceeds with it. Well, DEA, we would go after those proceeds, and I'll be the first to tell you this. One of our administrators that we had, I wasn't very fond of. I just wasn't very fond of. I didn't like the way he or she led, and it was really about their image, it seemed like. But this particular administrator did one thing, and that said, we've got to focus on the assets more, because what we were doing was we were arresting people, seizing their drugs, putting them in jail, and securing their drugs. But what we weren't doing was getting their assets. So these dealers, these leaders, they were in these, we call them DTOs, drug trafficking organizations. They were in jail, and they still had the financial power to call the shots from in the jail or in prison. Or once they got back out, they still had their resources, their proceeds, where they can get right back in the game. And so this administrator had us refocus, re-energize our efforts into really going after the assets. And what that would do is, by the time we sent someone to prison, it was our intent to make them destitute, because you take away their money, you take away their power. Yeah. And when they come back out and they start to try to go back into the game, one, they don't have the resources to get back into the game. And then two, when they do, somebody else has already taken over their turf. And so they're not going to they're going to think that they're going to try to get back in power again. So they don't want that person back. And so, by then we were already after the next person. So it's just, people said, there's so many different things that's the root of evil. I believe greed is the root of all evil, because you have something, but you want more. You have this, but you want more, and it's just, instead of just being satisfied with what you have. So you start commingling, your drug proceeds with your legitimate proceeds. Well, the government can seize it all. Then you have to prove, on your dime, that the proceeds that you had from your legitimate business, what it is and how much it is and how you obtained it. And it's not for the government to decide that. So
how big of a problem is like opioids or marijuana and so forth in our country right now, in terms of preventing people from being who they were meant to be?
Well, I'm going to tell you now, and you're going to have a lot of leaders are going to disagree with this, but it's just factual. What's frustrating, let's talk about marijuana for just a quick second.
Okay.
Or a minute. A person's brain, scientists have proven that a brain develops up until it's about 25.
Right.
Okay. Marijuana has been shown to, just like any other illegal drug, it's been shown to slow down the development of the brain. So you have people that say marijuana is a harmless drug. It's not a harmless drug. DEA allows a business through a licensed business to be able to go out and do all kind of testing on the medicinal value of marijuana. And so at one point, I forgot the exact number, how many hundreds of businesses or organizations were actually doing their own testing for marijuana that were all licensed to do so. But of whatever the number was, 70% were focused solely on marijuana. Okay, so all these businesses or licensees were trying to go out and test, all these different types of drugs, but 70% of them were focusing on marijuana. And not one of them came up with a legitimate purpose of medicinal marijuana. Now there's attributes of marijuana that has medicinal value, but not in itself, not, the marijuana leaf itself. The thing about people say, well, we should, we should make it for medicinal purposes. We should do it for this. We should do it for that. In Arizona, for example, at one point, when you start looking at the stats of who was using medicinal marijuana, and you would think it would be the elderly, because that's what you always hear about with cataracts or pain or this or that. But when you were actually looking at the demographics of it, the vast majority were 20 to 30-year-olds. And it's just like, and those numbers were higher than what you saw on the 60 to 80-year-olds. And so it's not the for the elderly, like that the media purports a lot. It's the younger people were doing it. When we were young, if you had something going on, you were told to get over it, suck it up, or work through it, push through it, depending on whatever it was. You got people that first time they run into something, they're dealing with adversity, and want to stop and get high and say, that's what I need to relax me. Go run if you need to be relaxed. Go play a sport if you need to be relaxed. Read a book. But anyway, and so we started talking about with marijuana. So then you have people. So if you have any type of mental health issue, and it's depending on whatever you have. Well, marijuana has been proven to show that it actually it amplifies whatever the mental health issue is. And so, you got people self-medicating with marijuana and their brain is not being developed, because if they're younger than 25. And then the next thing you know, we're telling everybody that this person has mental health issues. Well, this person has mental health. Well, how old are they? 27. Well, how long have they been smoking marijuana? I don't know, for about 5 years, 8 years. Okay, so you contributed to your brain being underdeveloped, and now you have mental health issues. And now us in law enforcement are supposed to recognize that the first second that we meet with you.
Yeah.
Or anybody else in society, we're supposed to recognize that. And it's so in my humble opinion, I say it's self-induced mental health crisis. But so marijuana, the problem with marijuana too is that it used to be, well, with marijuana, you can just get a joint itself, right? But if you have two people that know what they're doing, you have two people, one person that knows what they're doing with the marijuana, how to grow it, cultivate it, another one who doesn't. And each marijuana leaf is as unique as our fingerprints, or as a snowflake. You're not going to find two of the same ones. So it's hard to regulate because you can't manufacture it exactly the same. And so, I can know what I'm doing and you cannot know what you're doing. Someone can take a joint from you and smoke the entire joint and get a slight high, a slight buzz. And whereas if I know what I'm doing, they can take one hit off of my joint and be high as a kite. And yet they went to two different distilleries and got it right. And so you can't control and regulate that. It's very difficult to do so. Then the other problem is that, you can easily lace marijuana. It's being laced right now with fentanyl. PCP used to be LSD, all these hallucinogens. And people think that with a hallucinogen, for example, it never leaves your system. It never leaves your system. Everything else eventually flush out, but a hallucinogen won't. And so there's no way of telling when you're going to have a reaction to it. And so you could be driving down the road 20 years later with your family in the car and all of a sudden start tripping. I was doing a presentation one time for a crowd, and it was and I was talking about this same thing, with hallucinogens, LSD, PCP, and at the end of my, during my presentation, I was talking about, imagine taking it when you're, at a younger age, in your early 20s or whatever, and then eventually, you get married, you have kids, and one day you're just driving down the road, and all of a sudden you start tripping out, and your family's freaking out because you're having some kind of medical emergency where they stop the car and have to save you. And when I say save you, get you stop the car and really save everybody, because otherwise you'll wreck out. And so I had told this story, and well, this guy came up to me after my presentation, and he's like, Agent, I got to tell you something. That story you told, that happened to my family. He goes, my dad was driving, and all of a sudden he started having what we thought was a medical emergency. We had to get the car stopped, before he wrecked out and hurt us all. And then we rushed him to the hospital, and then he was laying in the bed, and we were filling out, my mom was filling out, the paperwork and going through his history. And nobody in his family knew that he used to do LSD. And finally, when the dad came through and they were finishing the paperwork, going through the questions, well, that's when he said, yeah, I used to do LSD. And it was a shocker to everybody. And he had this reaction. He just started tripping, and nobody knew what triggered it.
Yeah.
It was very scary.
Crazy. So is one of your biggest worries with this legalizing of marijuana that it's going to cause a huge mental health crisis in about 10 years in our country?
No, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And, the hardcore facts are just, they're not being put out there by the media, unfortunately, because it's a money-making business. Everything evolves around making money. If we have the laws that we can actually stop the illegal importation of drugs, do you know what it would do to our economy?
Yeah.
When you start looking at real estate, property, vehicles, jewelry, you name it, everyone that's getting rich off of drugs, they're putting the money back in the economy. And if we really stopped it, it would have an adverse effect, on our economy. And it's sad, but that's, in my humble opinion, that's a harsh reality.
And when you're dealing with as a DEA agent, I'm sure you were probably in some situations that were pretty life-threatening or life-altering situations.
Well, anytime you do undercover, it is. I mean, it's always, because you never know what you're going to get into. You're already dealing with somebody who's not stable, and what I mean by that, they're already driven by proceeds. And so, you can go do an undercover, and a person could swear up and down you're a cop, and then you have to swear up and down you're not a cop and try to convince them you're not a cop. And then you start talking money to them. And, I don't need to buy from you. You say whatever you need to say. And then later on, after you make the arrest, this happened. And I knew you as a blankety blank blank cop. And I was, if you knew I was a blankety blank cop, then why'd you sell? And because you kept talking all that money. Well, there's your problem. You're doing it to get rich.
There's your greed part again.
The greed part. And, the sad thing about traffickers too, all traffickers, I don't care what level they are, low, little, middle, high, all traffickers. Traffickers have a blatant disregard for human life. They have no value for anybody other than putting money in their pocket. And they know this stuff could cause someone's demise. In Plano 20, 30 years ago, there were people that were selling heroin, and they were selling it to high schools. And what they were doing was they were using these high school students as guinea pigs, because they kept stepping on the heroin, mixing it with different things to try to get that perfect mix. And what they were doing was they were killing students. The students had money, they thought they were invulnerable, and they were buying the stuff. And a task force was created, and eventually they found these dealers. And it's just, these guys knew what they were doing was wrong. but they didn't care because they were getting money and they were trying to get that perfect mix. And what a perfect mix is with illegal narcotics, I don't know. There's no such thing in my opinion.
Yeah.
But they do it for the proceeds.
So as you moved forward in your career with the DEA, the whole time you were with the DEA, you're still in the Air Force Reserve. So you're doing dual roles there.
I was, and that was interesting. But I can tell you, DEA was awesome. I mean, they allowed me the time that I needed to go do my military stuff, my deployments. They allowed me the time to do my training stuff. And federal government gives you essentially 120 hours of military leave, which is equivalent to 15 days. And then you have to burn some of your own annual leave at times to do some things, or you go on leave without pay, such as what I did with my deployments. So earlier you asked what I did in Afghanistan. And when I was there, I was the counter intel officer for the International Security Assistance Forces. So we had, in 2009, we had ISAF billets, which, you work for the international side, even as a U.S. military. And then you had US-4 Alpha, which is U.S. Forces Afghanistan. And so, which were just U.S. forces. So we all worked together hand in hand, trying to go out and do certain missions. At the time, DEA had a large presence over there because there's a lot of opium, and a lot of the opium is being used to fund terrorism. And that, get back on my soapbox for a minute about opium. And what's frustrating is that when Americans are using illegal narcotics such as heroin or anything that's opiate based, or even cocaine for that matter now, all the proceeds eventually end up back in a war zone like Afghanistan. And so when you got U.S. military over there and, our coalition forces, but we're going to talk about U.S. military for a second. We're over there out in engaging troops in contact with the Taliban and Al Qaeda. They're firing wet rounds at us. They're firing mortars at us, rockets at us. And they're using the drug proceeds that from what we're spending on heroin here in the U.S. and they're firing against us. So essentially, we got our people in the United States that are using these illegal drugs that are funding these bad guys who are killing us, trying to defend the country.
Trying to make their life better.
Yes.
Making the life of the American citizen better, but because we're using so much of that stuff, the money we're buying it, the money we're using to buy it is funding the Taliban.
Right.
Unbelievable.
You're talking about being in a position where you're burning the candle on both ends.
Yeah, unbelievable. That's just unbelievable.
And it really used to frustrate me when I would see military servicemen and women using heroin, because everyone's susceptible to using illegal drugs. And, we arrested a guy in one of my duty assignments that was a military guy. And I had him in my car and I chewed him out, Joe. I dropped choice words and I'm not ashamed to say, excuse me, but I was telling him, you're essentially contributing to the demise of your fellow military members overseas. If your butt was over there and rounds are being fired over your head and you're trying to make yourself as small a target as possible, when are they going to run out of ammo? Well, they're not going to run out of ammo because you keep buying drugs and sending them money so that they can buy more ammo. But see, things like that aren't talked about by the media. And that's where it's frustrating, because people don't realize, how bad it is. And so DEA had a large presence over in Afghanistan, and whatever the reason may be, and which it's not my place to stay here or there, but eventually DEA was, they had to shut down, and eventually, what happened recently where we don't have hardly anybody in Afghanistan anymore. But what used to be cool is I would go to the part of my job over there is I would go to the mission briefings, and we would have, I worked international, so I would go there with a lot of the international special forces. So, and it would be international special forces, and then it would also be U.S. Special Forces. And so I'd go sit in a meeting, and to tell you about the impact DEA had over there, which was phenomenal, absolutely phenomenal. They would sit there and one of the intel folks would start briefing, and they'd say, yeah, we're going out and doing a joint operation with DEA. They have an informant. We're going to go do this. The next week, you would hear about the results of it, on these kill capture missions and whatnot. And so of the 10 or so like Army Special Forces that were there, at least every week I would hear 3 of them talk about joint ops with DEA. And we had enough people over there, and everyone was just, our DEA folks liked it because it was making a difference. And the U.S. military working with them hand in hand was making a difference. And it was just cool listening to briefing, this is our target. We're going after this person. We're going to do this, this, and this. And, it's a kill capture mission. And then next week, such and such has been eliminated, So like, I guess he didn't want to go peacefully. So, but those are the type of things that you got to see, and our U.S. military in Afghanistan was, we worked hard, and we probably put in more hours than anybody else of all the different nations. There were other nations that, were great allies and did a great job, but the U.S. military, there wasn't such a thing as a 8 or a 10-hour day.
Yeah. People don't understand that, do they?
No. And it's, and we would go off, and I was lucky because even though I was Air Force in the position I was doing, I didn't report to my direct, my career field. And I actually reported to an Army Lieutenant Colonel who said, go forth and have fun. I call it having fun, but my definition of fun is a lot different than most people.
Yeah, I can imagine it is. All right, I got to get to the last 3 questions and let you go because I know you're busy today. But what's your purpose in life?
Honestly, it's serving others. I just can't be any more clear than that. I'm having a lot of fun with what I'm doing, what I've done, but it's serving others. And just when I see other people becoming successful, knowing that I had a hand in that, I don't want accolades, I don't want recognition, but I just want to sit back and going, man, I helped that person.
Yeah,
that's what I learned from my good supervisors that I've had.
That's awesome. What's your perspective on life? You got to have such a deep perspective with all of the things that you've done and put your life on the line for so many of us. I mean, what's your perspective?
It's simple, and it's very cliche. As you have one life, and live it to the fullest. When you're laying on your deathbed, you don't want to sit there and have regrets and go, I should have done, I could have done. I'm 53 now, and I've lived a lot longer than several people have. Not everybody, but people die of all ages. And if I had to lay down and die right now, I can sit there and say, hey, I've led a full life with the amount of things that I've been very blessed and fortunate. I will say this, I used to always sit there and say, I got here on my own. And it wasn't until maybe 10 years ago or so, maybe a little bit longer, that one of these little epiphanies that I had again. And I realized I didn't get here on my own. I'm half black, half white. My dad was, we had an interracial marriage. There are so many people out there, black, white, Asian, Hispanic, known and unknown, that have gotten me to where I am right now, just like all of us. Yeah. There's so many people that we will never, ever know or hear about who did something that has an effect on us right now to where we are. And so I stopped saying I got here on my own. I still had to put in the work to get there, but I didn't get here on my own.
Yeah, and you didn't. None of us got here on our own, and that's a great point. I love that. And the other thing is now, the other thing is we haven't gotten here on our own, but we're also called to help other people get to where they're going, so they're not on their own, right? So they're not by themselves, right. And that's what I love about what you just said. What a great way to put that. And the last one, what's your passion, Anthony? What's something that you just love to do? It doesn't have to be work, or doesn't have to be, what's your passion in life?
Well, just living to the fullest, just having fun and enjoying the good things. Right now, there's so many bad things in the world, especially what's going on here in the U.S. But just try to appreciate it and just live to the fullest. I have a passion for golf, my family, God. I have a passion for Greece. I'd love to go to the country there and live on visit the islands and just, I'm just, every day I wake up, I'm just blessed. I'm still here. I've had too many close calls, in Afghanistan, too many close calls as a police officer in Dallas. And if I told some of these stories, why I'm still here, I don't know. But it all started, I'll tell you this, when I was 3 years old and I was run over by a car. There's no way I should have made it. And so I just keep saying, God wants me here for a reason. There's a purpose he has me, because at 3, he should have took me. And then with Dallas PD, there's things that I did that, work-wise, that he should have took me. And there's things with DEA, and there's things in Afghanistan. And I'm still here for a purpose. So I think my purpose is just to keep serving others, and until he tells me otherwise.
Man, you're an amazing man. We might have to do a second podcast with you, just because I think there is some more stuff we could dive into. Maybe get into some of those stories if you can share them. Some of those things to give really people a real perspective of what people in the DEA, what people who are police officers, what people who are in the military, what they really truly do to serve us, and how they truly do put their life on the line to serve us. And so we might have to do that again. You and I are both on a journey now. We've been asked by Vistage to start CEO leadership peer advisory groups. Yours is down in Frisco, Texas, and mine's here in the Denver area. So that's been a challenge for both of us, I know, and we're both supporting each other with that, and hopefully getting our groups going to help each other, to help these people and support these leaders and so forth. So it's a really great concept, and I know you're excited about it, and I'm excited about it too. And this is kind of how our journey, how our paths crossed and so forth, and we're going to keep supporting each other with that. But Anthony, you're just an amazing guy. That's all I can say. And I know people are going to get a lot out of this. I want people to take a lot out of this and really replay it a couple times just to get everything that you truly gave them in this podcast. But I just want to thank you for coming on today, and wish you nothing but the best in the future. And I know our paths are going to keep crossing. So I appreciate you coming on.
I appreciate you having me, Joe. And I got to say something though. I know I've had a full life so far, and I'm very pleased with it. But if you ask me, man, I'm just your average Joe citizen, man. I'm just your basic guy, and that's my mentality. And no one could ever tell me otherwise. I don't take it for granted what I've been able to do and how lucky I've been and blessed. But I've done no more than anybody else, and.
Well, that's kind of up for debate, but I know you're humble and so forth, but I sure look up to you and look up to what you've done and how you served us. So, Godspeed on the rest of on the path that you're taking now. I know you're still in the military. You're still serving the people that are underneath you. You're still leading them in a great way and teaching them to be great leaders as well. And that's what our country needs. And I just so appreciate you coming on, and I wish you nothing but the best. And I know we'll keep talking and keep serving each other. So I just want you to have a great day. I know you got a big meeting today and so forth with another leader of your community, and I know you'll have a profound effect on him as well. So thanks for coming on, Anthony.
Well, thank you, Joe. I appreciate you, brother. Have a good one.
You too. Thank you so much for listening to today's edition of the People Progressing podcast with Anthony Carter. Man, what an amazing human being he is. I just hope you learned something from it. And if you If you need to get a hold of me, I would love to come speak to your group, work with your group on culture building, team building, leadership training, any of that kind of stuff. I love doing it. I am starting a Vistage group. If you have any interested in joining my Vistage group, I'd love to talk to you about that too. I think it's a powerful way to help you and your business grow and so forth. So if you need to get a hold of me, you can get a hold of me through coachjoewhite97@gmail.com, or you can get on my website, buy my book at coachjoewhiteconsulting.com. Thank you so much for supporting our show. Please download this, share it with other people, write reviews and so forth on the podcast. Is trying to grow this too, so people can keep progressing. Have a great day. Bye-bye.